Hey friends, welcome to the Determinetruth Podcast, where we equip the church to be the church.
Hey everyone, welcome in. We are in our Pastoral series, going as we go through the New Testament. And if you're here and hanging out, hey, hit the subscribe button. You'll hear about when we have our new episodes that launch each Monday, and engage here. We'd love to hear what you have to say, especially as we talk about leadership in the church. What is a pastoral requirement? So we're going to talk about that today. And one of the things that we want to make sure that we do is to not merely make this addressed toward church leaders. And I think we've had a lot of conversations about what is the church leader doing and whatnot. But I mean, this is kind of relevant. I think it's relevant to everyone in certain ways. I mean, what we're going to talk about as we actually go through 1 Timothy 3 today, like these are not merely requirements for a pastor, but everything asked here of a pastor is basically what's asked of all Christians in some kind of way. These aren't like extraordinary
Mhm.
asks, especially from an ethical standpoint and a character standpoint. These are just kind of Christian things. But we'll go through that. But I mean, this is still can be a topic that's relevant to everyone who's listening to this, even if they themselves are not a pastor, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And by the way, if you subscribe to the YouTube channel, you're going to get notified anytime we have a new video up on any other topic, not just the podcast. So I want to encourage you to do that as well. Yeah, the issue of and we're on our pastoral epistles. I think you said our pastoral episodes, but the idea we call them the pastoral epistles because of the First
No, I'm
Timothy,
I'm
Second
having
Timothy,
an
and Titus.
episode is the problem.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's right. That's another issue. We'll talk
That
about
isn't
that
it.
offline,
Yes.
though, Vinnie.
Mhm.
And we'll get you help. Help is coming soon. We'll
I
get
need
this
so
through this
much help.
podcast quickly, and
Lots of
help
help.
will be at your front door as soon as we're done.
If you would like to contribute to my help fund, you can
Anyways,
go to the
um,
Determinetruth giving page.
what we're trying to discuss here is First Timothy chapter 3 and Titus chapter 1 both kind of lay forth the requirements for being a pastor or elder and a deacon. And we wanted to walk through that a little bit just because it's relevant to all churches. I think some of you guys might go to a church where you're uncertain about the pastor being qualified or being
Mm.
equipped. Others of you maybe go to a home church and you're wondering like, well, what do we need to have someone lead this? And what does the scripture say about this? And I think those are interesting questions. So we'll kind of address those questions within the context of First Timothy chapter 3 and maybe dabbling in Titus chapter 1.
Yeah, no, that's good. So let's before we even get through the passages, let me ask you a few questions. We could kind of do some of these rapid fire, I guess, because we're going to get through the text today, Rob. It's going to happen. That's our
Yeah.
commitment. Um, we've already defined in a previous episode that terms like elder,
Mhm.
bishop, pastor, um, we would see this as a synonymous term. They're referring to the same
Right.
thing in the New Testament.
Mhm.
However, and we're going to see this in 1 Timothy 3, elder, bishop, pastor, whatever we want to call that, is not the same thing as deacon. Like deacon's something different.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
And we'll talk, I'm assuming, a little bit about deacons today,
Maybe.
but yeah, and oftentimes, especially in Baptist churches, the deacon is kind of operates in an elder kind of way. Oftentimes, Baptist churches will set up where
Yeah.
the pastor is the elder, and then the board of people around him who are helping to make decisions and
Yeah.
overseeing, those are the deacons. And that's I would say that's not what I see a deacon's responsibility
Right.
as
Right.
being, is a decision maker in that kind of way.
Yeah, I've actually was in a church one time where the deacons were the elders and the elders were the deacons. And I'm like,
Yeah, yeah.
so the idea of deacon, diakonos in Greek, just simply means a servant, one who waits on tables. So they're the ones that oversee ministries of care
Yeah.
and tithe and giving and services, things like that. The elders are supposed to be those who rule. So if your church does it upside down, or what we think is upside down, then what we are talking about when we talk about elders, just apply that to your deacons.
Yes,
Takes care of
yeah,
that
but they
problem.
are two different types of roles, and I know
Yeah,
that
they are.
even, John Piper, he was at, Bethlehem Bible Church in Minneapolis for
Bethlehem
decades.
Baptist, wasn't it Bethel Baptist or something like
Is
that?
it Bethlehem Baptist? Whatever it was,
Yeah.
Bethlehem,
Anyways,
yeah,
all right.
yeah, church, whatever it was. I know when he got in there, because he had a very strict idea of ecclesiology in terms of the role of the elder pastor versus deacon, and I think it took him, I studied this years ago, but it might have taken him 10 years in order to change the culture there to be an
Mm,
elder-led congregation rather than having deacons, running, and so this is
yeah.
also one of those things where If your church functions in an area of deacons kind of ruling, once again, like we talked about in previous episodes, don't go in guns blasting saying, "Hey, I listened
Yeah,
to this podcast and we're supposed to be this way." Like, hey, maybe
yeah,
your pastor knows this and maybe he says, "I'm being responsible and not trying to blow the whole thing up. I'm not trying to pull
yeah,
the rug out from everyone and not give them a place to land." Things take a while to get through. And so maybe your pastor's doing that. So just
yeah,
anything we say, once again, have charity as if you decide you need to approach your leadership.
yeah. And I would actually say, and does it really even matter? I mean, okay, so they call elders deacons and deacons elders. Okay, great. Next item. I just think there's other battles to be fighting and to be
Could be,
waging.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
So let's go through this a little bit.
sure. Okay.
Do we just want to start at the beginning of
Yeah.
First Timothy
You want to
3,
read?
or how do
You
we?
want to read a little bit? How about we do
Sure.
verses 1 through 7 of First Timothy chapter 3? I have the New American Standard on the screen. I'm not sure if you're going to read that translation or something else.
No, I'll read the NRS, but it'll be interesting to see
Okay.
the differences here. And I apologize.
Oh,
I am 2 months into being sick, so that's fun.
actually, I didn't have it up on the screen because I didn't have the right button pushed. Now it's on the
Dang
screen.
it, Rob. This is why we can't
Hey,
have nice things. We
that's
should
all
have
we
called
can.
our
We just need to find
deacon
better
to
help.
help serve. Okay. So First Timothy 3, 1 through 7. The saying is sure, whoever aspires to the office of bishop desires a noble task. Now, a bishop must be above reproach, married only once, temperate, sensible, respectable, hospitable, and an apt teacher. Not a drunkard, not violent, but gentle, not quarrelsome, and not a lover of money. He must manage his own household well, keeping his children submissive and respectful in every way. For if someone does not know how to manage his own household, how can he take care of God's church? He must not be a recent convert, or he may be puffed up with conceit and fall into condemnation of the devil. Moreover, he must be well thought of by outsiders so that he may not fall into disgrace and the snare of the devil. Man, this
Hmm.
is so weird because I'm an ESV guy. I've read this so many times in ESV, and it does read different in NRSV. I'm interested to see if you're
Yeah.
popping out. But I mean, there's just so many. Even as someone who studied this passage a lot, there's so many things where my question is, "What do you mean by this? What do you mean by this?" Um, first
Yeah.
off, starting off, if someone desires to be a pastor or a bishop, whatever, that's a noble thing. It's not bad to want um, to serve in that role, and that might be one of the hangups that I know I've come across men in my context. It was men who they kind of wanted to do that, but then they felt like, "Oh, if I want to do this, that's an
Oh.
arrogance or an ego, so I shouldn't say anything." And I'm glad that this passage begins with that because it kind of dispels the idea that
Hmm.
if you have this desire, hey, maybe that's a good desire that God's put in you.
Yeah, the teacher in me wants to teach for just a moment, Vinny, just a little
Mhm.
bit, kind of. So let's, if we can, just for a second, look at some interesting things that don't come out in translations very often. And Vinny, you might notice that it starts with "de
Yeah,
un," if, therefore, and
yeah.
"de" often has the sense of it is necessary. It's translated here as in New American Standard as "must." But notice that that "de," of course, occurs again in verse 7. It is necessary. So it seems to frame the passage. If anyone aspires to the office of overseer, then he must be this,
Mhm.
and he must have a good reputation. That's interesting there. I noticed, and then I thought it was interesting. Verse 6, it says, New American Standard says, "and not a new convert," so that your translation said
Mhm.
"or."
Mhm.
And the Greek, of course, is in order that not,
Yeah.
lest,
The
otherwise,
hina is
this will not
emphatic, yeah.
happen. Yeah, it's really emphatic. And then in order that not, down here, he will not fall in the reproach of the devil. So there's a lot of strong language in the text. I think that kind of is interesting there. But
Mhm.
now, did you ask another question that I lost track of already?
I have a question. I love the framing that it's saying
Yeah.
it's not bad to
Okay.
desire
Yeah.
to have a position in ministry like
Yeah.
overseeing. It doesn't necessarily mean you're arrogant. I know plenty of people who it's like, no, you should not have this role because you are arrogant or you have a power grab or that you're a narcissist. That can happen, but it doesn't mean you're necessarily those things because you have that
Right.
desire.
Yeah, that's right. But notice verse 7 makes a really interesting. I think it's. I'm sorry, it might not be verse 7. It's verse. Um, let's see, verse 3. Free from the love of money.
Yeah,
Of course, you see the love. First Timothy chapter 6. The love of money is the root of all sorts of evil. So a few
yeah.
chapters later, we have that famous statement. And what I find interesting about that is I associate money with power. It's
Hmm.
the idea of power and money often go hand in hand. So when I teach like worldview stuff and how to understand things and understand the Christian concept of kingdom versus the kingdoms of the world, it's often the kingdoms of the world are ruled by money and ruled by power.
Sure.
And so I associate those two together. I think that's why the love of money is the root of all sorts of evil. It's power, and often money goes hand in hand with power.
Well, and a
So
key distinction with that there and a qualification is with that passage is oftentimes misquoted as saying money is the root of all evil, but
no,
that's not what the passage says. It says the love of
love.
money.
That's right.
And so what we don't want to do is say, "Oh, this guy has money. He's well-to-do, therefore he shouldn't be an elder because obviously he's just after power." Maybe, maybe not, but
Right,
just
right.
having the thing in and of itself doesn't disqualify you.
No, not at all, not at all. But remember Scott McKnight when we first kind of started our podcast, we had him
Yeah.
on early on in our conversations, and he made the comment that everyone that wants to be a pastor, that's comfortable being a pastor,
Yeah.
is a narcissist to some extent.
At some
Anyone
yeah,
that feels
yeah.
comfortable speaking in front of 200 people or more is a narcissist. And so there is that danger there. By the way, there's also the danger you and I can totally recognize understand this, where the pastor becomes idolized by the
Oh,
women in
yeah.
the congregation.
Yeah.
Oh, I wish my husband were as good looking as Vinnie and Rob. That happens often. But I wish my husband had their spirituality as much as
Yes.
high as the pastor. I wish my husband, because we're talking to people from the scripture saying this is how we ought to live our lives. And sometimes we might come across us, and this therefore is how I live my life. And therefore, I wish, a woman might be saying, I wish my husband did that. And so it's a real danger. There's a lot of danger inherent in the position itself. And I
Mhm.
think we might have mentioned this in the last couple of weeks about how pastors need to be able to be transparent, but you have to be careful about being too transparent,
Yes.
because you don't want to come across as I have all of this figured out, but you also don't want to come across as I'm, really weak and because they're just going to take advantage of you. So there are those inherent dangers there, and I think that's part of he must not be a new convert because he's going to become conceited. There's because of the power, because of the way people look at you, and the authority and the power and the privilege that comes along with it. Um, a lot of dangers.
Yeah.
Danger, Will Robinson. Danger, danger.
That's right. Let me
That was
go let's just
lost
kinda
in
pick
space.
through the text in
Yeah. Okay.
order just to ask a few questions, and
Sure.
sometimes we might need to expand on something, sometimes we could answer it quickly. Um, the first thing Paul leads with here is the overseer, the bishop, the pastor must be above reproach.
Right.
Like, that seems like this seems like the baseline, like, I'm starting with this concept, and now if I'm Paul, I'm gonna expand on what above reproach means. What's a
Exactly.
basic understanding of above reproach?
Okay, and that's a excellent way of reading it. I think what happens here is that above reproach is actually the overriding ethic, the overriding principle that above all they must be above reproach, and then everything else falls underneath what above reproach means.
Mhm.
And I think the idea of above. By the way, an important point that I need to make before we even go into that, and that is the list is contextual. Now, it's
Mhm.
as we've said all along, these letters are occasional documents. I put down in the notes, Paul didn't address must not be addicted to video games.
Yeah.
Well, that's a real issue, especially for like some of the younger pastors that they get so addicted, or maybe the quarterback for the Arizona Cardinals, spend so much time playing video games that they're not attending to their duties,
Uh-huh.
details in their duties. But because they're occasional documents, that means this is not necessarily an exhaustive list. This list doesn't say, therefore, if you meet all these requirements, you're good, because there might be other issues that might not be relevant then, might have been relevant then, that maybe not now, or that
Mhm.
are relevant now that might not have been then. We have to be careful. So above reproach basically means impossible to bring a charge against.
Mhm.
And the idea is that they are respectable, have a good reputation with outsiders. All those things fall underneath what it means to be above reproach. Blameless. Titus chapter 1 says the same word. I think it substitutes the word blameless. Substitutes a different word for 1 Timothy 3. And one
Mhm.
of the things to understand about this now becomes this, and this is what I would often say, when we had elder training at our church, because we would have lay elders that would serve
Yeah.
for 3-year terms, and every year someone would go off and someone else or two or more people come on, and we walk through this passage and what it means to be an elder in the biblical text. I say, listen, we can read this passage one of two different ways. Okay, excuse me, and they're both bad. One way would be no one qualifies. There's a way of looking at this list saying, look, nobody can attain to that status. Okay. Therefore, no one's qualified.
Hmm.
Another way of looking at the list is, well, no one qualifies, therefore they're just kind of relative principles, like an organizing structure that if the best you can, maybe you like no, in some sense, the idea is this is what we're trying to attain to. The pastor,
Mm.
the leader especially, should be one who's trying to attain to a status of blamelessness, above reproachness, if I can say it that way. Never going to get there, but that's the goal. I know it's the pastor, the elder in this case, stands out as someone who's ahead of others on the journey towards Christ likeness in their own spiritual walk, in the sense of maturity, spiritual maturity, knowledge of the word, ethics, and practice. Does that help a little bit? Any thoughts that you might want to add to that?
No, I think that's good. And even the idea of above reproach um, is is something that you can't bring a charge against. What that doesn't mean is, well, someone brought a charge, therefore he's not above
Right.
reproach. It would have to be a credible charge, right?
Exactly. Yeah, and Paul does say, like, "Hey, listen, if anyone brings an accusation against an elder, there needs to be a couple people involved, because here's what's going to happen: you're going to get people that are not liking your because you did
Sure.
this, or you didn't like because you didn't do that, and they're going to make charges against you." And Paul's like, "Well, don't entertain that too quickly, just because they're up there. It's easy to do so, and if you entertain it too quickly, what happens is it gets attention of everybody else. It's kind of like the way propaganda works, right? The media will say,
Yeah.
"Oh, so and so was a terrorist and he did this act," and the next day you're like, "Oh, he's not actually a terrorist." But you know what? Everybody thinks he's a terrorist now. Even if I recant 2 days later,
Yeah.
I already impressed upon their minds that this person's a terrorist.
Yeah, they already
That's
poisoned the
obviously an
well.
extreme example, but the same idea. You make an accusation, and if that gets public, that person's character and
Yeah.
not just their character, but their ability to pastor others. Now, again, and we'll discuss this, I think, in weeks to come. That might be important. We're not saying that they're fault. It might be important to bring this out. We gotta, but sometimes when you make that accusation, I get it. We don't agree politically, but that doesn't mean I'm a bad person. And as soon as you start calling me a bad person on Facebook, or whatever, that is now just because I don't align with you politically. Now that's going to hinder my ability to minister to this person over here. Not
Yeah.
good.
Um, it goes on in verse 2 still. And the translation matters. Most translations, it'd be interesting to see what you do this with this.
Okay.
But it says married in NRSV, married only once. In the ESV, it says the husband of one wife.
Yeah.
The Greek just says, it literally says a one woman man.
Yeah.
Um, so this becomes controversial, I know, for a lot of churches in terms of when they have requirements for pastoral candidates, where they refuse to hire a candidate based on this passage if the
Yeah.
candidate, for instance, has been
Oops.
remarried.
Um,
They've been divorced
yeah.
and remarried. They'll say, "Well, he's been married more than once, and so this is, he's disqualified for pastorship." Where I've seen that as well, where I could think of a couple people who they're pastors while they're serving in the pastorship. Their wife was the one. I can think of multiple people actually. The
Yeah.
wife was the one who was unfaithful, who left and abandoned the relationship.
Exactly.
Eventually, that man uh, got uh, remarried, and in many cases their churches had said, "Hey, you're ineligible for pastoral leadership because you're married more than once." Is that what this path is? So is this talking about divorce? Is this talking about
Right.
death and remarriage? I've come to the conclusion on, I don't think Paul is talking about those things, because Paul has words for those. Paul has words for divorce. He probably would have used those. I think he's talking about something else. How do you interpret that phrase?
Yeah, you have other issues as well. So some have suggested that it refers to polygamy,
Or polygamy
not
would be
more
one.
than one wife at a time. Like,
Yeah,
the problem was that we have no real indication that polygamy was actually a significant issue at the time that
correct.
Paul would have
Yep.
addressed it. So that doesn't seem to fit at all. You have, and again, understanding that this is the principle that we're trying to ascribe to doesn't mean that we're going to attain the principle perfectly. I think it probably means something like that the pastor should be faithful in the marital and sexual realm.
Mhm.
Okay, I think that's the idea. Now, I don't. It might even be a way of saying, do not commit adultery. The
Yeah,
pastor's one who has not committed adultery. Okay. The problems become this: what if a person's widowed? Well, I think you might have mentioned that, right? And
yeah.
then remarried.
Hmm.
they're excluded from pastoral ministry, because if you're taking this literally, only having one wife, not one wife at a time, but only having one wife, therefore you were widowed and you remarried. That can't be what Paul's getting at, because the
Hmm.
idea of this is a character issue. In other words, if a person has more than one wife, there's a character issue that disqualifies them from being a pastor. Somebody that was widowed and remarried because for all kinds of reasons, that's great. Paul even says in 1 Corinthians 7, if that happens, make sure it's only a Christian person, when he talks to widows. I don't see how he would be forbidding somebody from being remarried when they were widowed. Or what if they were divorced and remarried prior to becoming a Christian?
Hmm.
Are we going
Hmm.
to apply that ethic to them as well? I think what Paul's saying is this is the character of the person who's going to be in the role of an elder or pastor or bishop. And if they don't have this character, then they are disqualified. What you did prior to coming to faith in Christ, what you did in getting remarried as a widower, I don't see how that would disqualify a person at all. And let me also comment this, by the way. We do a really, really bad job in the church of taking care of people that are divorced.
Hmm.
I mean, we just do.
Yeah.
And we have all kinds of things for Valentine's Day and all these different well, we celebrate marriages and whatever. And people that have been divorced have been hurt.
Hmm.
My mom, you might know, she grew up as a single parent. She was a single parent and my dad was the one that did it. He's the one that cheated on her. He's the one that left. He's the one that, and my mom went through all kinds of turmoil because of the way the church treated her, and the way they didn't care for them, the way that single persons, older single adults are not cared for and attended in the churches. That I just think, man, that's just tragic. I think these people are wounded and they need our love and our help. And I think especially if they are faithful in the marital and sexual realm and they've been divorced in the past, I would have no problem hiring that person. I
Yeah.
wouldn't. I don't think that's what's going on. I think Paul's saying this is a character issue, and if they have this issue there, they're not qualified. And I think it's faithfulness in the marital and sexual realm.
Yeah, and I largely agree with that. It's not talking about polygamy. He could have used a word for that or described
Yeah.
it in a clearer term. He's not talking about divorce. He could have used the word divorce or talked about that.
Right.
He's used the word divorce in other contexts. Um,
Yeah.
what I think it's talking about is when you look at culturally, men had the freedom to act sexually,
Yeah.
even married
Oh,
men.
that's a great
Yeah,
point. Yeah.
and so it's
By
similar
the way, it
to the
wasn't just
part.
the freedom; it was the expectation.
It's the
In
assumption.
Greek and Greco-Roman culture,
Yeah,
it was assumed that your
yeah,
wife was for sexual reproduction
yes,
and everybody else was for sexual pleasure, and the
yes.
male had that right to have sexual pleasure.
And so in the same way that in our modern time, we might look at certain types of people, I mean, you look at a movie like The Godfather, you look at like a genre like that, and it's like, oh, you assume that the mobster he's married and has a family, but he has girls on the side. You just assume that's the way it is. You look at professional athletes or musicians who are on the road all the time, and the assumption is, oh, all these guys have girls on the side. They might be married and they have their lady, but they have these things that are happening. I think this is the idea that Paul is referring to is, hey,
Yeah,
no, guy who's doing this, it's assumed that while they assume that you're going to be messing around, you're not doing that. You're a one
yeah,
woman man.
yeah,
And so that's the
exactly.
way I understand that.
Yeah, exactly, and
So it's
putting this in
fidelity.
light of the Roman culture, Greco-Roman culture is actually really, really helpful.
At Determined Truth, we do more than just this podcast. One of our major projects is training pastors in India each week. We even help start a Bible college there. But we could only do this because of the generous support from partners like you. Seriously, that means you. If you'd consider supporting us with a fully tax-deductible donation with anything from $5 a month or more, we can continue to equip the church to be the church. To give, go to determinetruth.com and click on the Give tab, or find the link in today's show notes. Thanks.
With this, though, let's pause right here because this brings up another question based on two things, pronoun usage and this first topic.
Mhm. Oh, yeah,
And so from a complementarian background,
yeah,
right away they're going to say, see, this is laying down the qualification for elders. It's using
right,
masculine language, and it
yeah,
referred to the man only being married once. It didn't say that, she or they. It's all in the masculine program, and it's referring to the man doing this thing. Therefore, this is another example of saying only men should hold the role of bishop, overseer, pastor. How do you address that?
First off, I say that's actually a really good point. It's a really good argument. I'm not gonna deny the fact that, that's a good argument. Makes a lot of sense. It says, let's see down here in verse 11. It talks about deacons. This is
Yes.
interesting. It talks about deacons, verse 8. I don't have this all color coded as much. And then it says in verse 11, women must likewise be dignified. Now the Greek over
W
here, in,
no, depending on the translation, because it's
yeah,
the word for woman could be woman or wife. And
yeah,
so like the
exactly,
NRSV and the NASB both
yeah.
translate in verse 11 as women,
Let's see.
whereas in the ESV it says their wives likewise, which is
Yeah.
the question of, is this the
That's
wives of
yeah,
deacon,
the Net Bible right here says their wives. Yeah, very good. Go ahead,
or
Vinny.
is it the women deacons?
Yeah, and then ESV says their wives,
Yeah.
as I'm scrolling through a few translations here. Um, and verse 11, women. No, their wives again. That's the new NIV. So yeah, very, very interesting. Yeah. So the first thing I would say is actually, okay, that's a good point. It's actually a strong argument. I don't know why Paul omitted this. I think at the time, there probably wasn't. I guess the best way I would answer the question, and it might appear to be a kind of a weak answer. I guess the best way I'd answer the question would be to say that the male was the primary authority within the culture, and therefore Paul addressed that. That Paul didn't address the women in terms of them. I don't think it's an oversight. I think it's just a cultural phenomenon. Just like we often say, um, we say he about God. This may not be a perfect analogy, but we often describe God as a he. God's
Mhm,
actually genderless. God doesn't have a gender. So we just simply use that.
mhm.
We use that, um,
It's the
we use
default
the
pronoun
masculine
in a
gender
sense.
often for
Yeah,
things like that.
yeah.
Yeah. What's that?
I said you said we use the masculine gender often. I
Masculine
would say it's
pronouns.
the
Yeah.
it's the default pronoun
I'm
is what
sorry.
we
Yeah.
use.
The pronoun, masculine gender, obviously. Yeah,
Yeah,
my
yeah.
bad.
I mean,
Yep.
even
Thank
the
you.
same way, it's only till recently in the last 20 plus years where everyone is a fireman, congressman,
Exactly.
mailman, regardless of gender. Now we parse those
Yep.
things out a little bit more, but it's the default pronoun.
Yeah. Yeah. Ace is the place of your helpful hardware.
Store?
It used to be man.
Oh,
But
really?
it's not, yeah, it used to be man, the old jingle, "Ace is the place to helpful hardware man," and now it's like
Oh,
Hardware Pro, or it's
hardware
something other
stores.
than
Yeah.
man. Yeah,
Hmm,
and
hmm.
mailman,
Yep, yep.
yeah, all these things that we do like that. So I think that's
Yeah.
probably the best explanation. Now, my next response would be, well, alright, you've made a good point, certainly seems to argue for, that women can't be pastors, but that can't be your only argument. If that's the end result of your case. We already discussed the First Timothy 2 there, so it makes sense. I'll concede that.
Verse 3, not
Okay.
a it also says he's an apt teacher, or has the
Yeah,
ability to, yeah, able to teach. Uh,
yeah. And
what's
yet
the
they led us into
expectation there?
pastoral ministry anyways, Vinny.
Say it again?
They led us into pastoral ministry
I
anyways.
know. Teaching what, man? Yeah,
Yeah.
teaching about fantasy football.
Amen.
Uh,
Go
so
Patriots.
I've seen this especially with lay elders or lay
Yeah,
pastors who come in, which most churches have some form of that, a lay leadership. And these are like great guys with great, uh, character and whatnot. But man, theologically, they can't even teach. They're like theologically just have a very low acumen, and they're
right.
just like they don't really know a whole lot. What should we say about pastors? I've even seen this with pastors who are vocational pastors, and they just cannot teach. Um, what should the expectation be? Should a pastor, vocationally or layperson, have the ability to get up and preach expository sermons and give a teaching on the hypostatic union and like what should we expect from every pastor we encounter? Is there a minimum there?
Well, so one way to handle this passage, it's that some churches will do, is to say that but Paul later distinguishes between ruling elders and teaching elders. And therefore, this statement must be able to teach applies to teaching elders. Well, that's helpful. It's great. The problem with that is the text doesn't necessarily distinguish that here. You get that later,
It's not
but
creating a
not
second
here.
category here.
Yeah, yeah. Because first, I think in chapter 5, he says, those
Mhm.
who teach deserve
Yeah, yeah.
double wages.
Yes,
Um,
5:18, yeah.
and so again, that leads us to the question of is there more behind the text than what we know? In other words, is Paul speaking to people who know what he's talking about? And therefore, when he says they must be able to teach, they know he means those who are in teaching roles. Maybe that's the case. That would take care of the problem. But if that's the case, it just reminds us that this text, like all texts, are occasional documents written to a specific day and a specific time, a specific culture, with people having specific assumptions. We just got to be careful. So I would simply say this. Then my first response would be, well, we know throughout the pastoral letters, First Timothy, Second Timothy, and Titus, the responsibility for the church, especially Second Timothy, Paul telling Timothy, to exhort the people of God to sound doctrine. I've said before that I think it's the scriptures itself. We did this a couple weeks ago. The scriptures itself that is transformative, the word of God that's transformative. Therefore, it must be preeminent among God's leaders or the leaders within the church to be able to teach or to convey the scriptures. The caveat with that, the thing that we have to be careful with is like at what level, to what standard? And I don't think Paul's answering that question. I think we talked about Tim in New York City.
Oh, Tim Keller. Yeah.
Yeah, Tim Keller. That neither one. He wasn't a dynamic preacher. He wasn't this
Hmm.
wow flamboyant, but he was really effective. And so you can have the charismatic, flamboyant storyteller that captures an audience, and then you can have the Tim Keller. I think there's a lot of pastors that are really effective teachers, even though they're not dynamic teachers. And I
Sure.
think the reason why they're so effective as teachers is because their life, their character gives them the authority to stand up in front of that community, especially in a small church. This works well now. They know the community knows them, and they trust him
Mm.
or her. And therefore, what they say carries that added weight or that added authority, even though they don't have the ability to wax eloquently upon this text and grapple with all these texts. I think there's a lot to be said for that. So I think that this passage then to say it all will be needs to be understood in light of the fact that this is a primary role of the pastor and leader is to convey the word of God and let the word of God be transformative, but it's also relative and not absolute to like your standard of being able to teach or my standard of being able to teach, but someone who can convey the word of God with effectiveness. And then whether or not it applies to all elders or only those who are teaching would be another question. And that's kind of, I would be comfortable with that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good. We see some other
Yep.
descriptive words: sober-minded, so like a
Mm,
clear thinker,
yeah.
self-controlled, respectable, hospitable. Um, these seem to be the the mindset in terms of like how a pastor ought to engage not only his congregation, but just this is how he should ought to be at all times, right? Sometimes you find a pastor who it's easy to, what does Jesus say? It's easy, tax collector, it's easy to love one another.
Yeah.
Love someone else? And I've seen that with pastors where it's like, oh, you're really good at loving your congregation, but can you just do this towards outsiders? Do you have self-control towards
Yeah.
outsiders? Are you hospitable towards outsiders as well?
Yeah. And I think what's interesting is all the things that you just mentioned don't often make the list,
Hmm.
or they're overlooked because, well, they're able to teach because they only have one wife,
Yeah.
because they meet all the other requirements. Like, no, character really, really matters.
Yeah.
And the integrity really, really matters. And how you convey yourself towards outsiders really, really matters. And so, yeah, you're looking at a list. And again, remember understanding it in light of the Greco-Roman culture where alcohol and drinking was
Hmm.
expected. And um, humility wasn't a virtue. In fact,
Hmm.
humility was like you're humble because you have
Yeah.
no
Yeah.
other choice. And so what happens, and this you'll see this a lot in First Peter letters, for example, where if you're accused of something, this is even the Gospels, if you're accused of something, your responsibility is to defend yourself. And one of
Mm.
the ways you defend your honor is by putting them down. And Paul's giving like, no, no, we don't do that. We don't do it. We treat people hospitably with respect towards outsiders. We have a good reputation. It's like, well, one of the here's the big problem with this, or potential issue or problem, and that is when you are not retaliatory, when you don't call people names, when you're not pugnacious, which the word for fighting, um, people will take advantage of that
Mm.
because they know you're a softie. So how do you maintain that strong leadership, that strong character, and at the same time, consider others better than yourselves. Have the attitude that was in Christ Jesus. Lay down your life for them. Wash one another's feet. All that humility just opens the door for people to take advantage of that person because it's easy to do so because they're kind of soft. And so I think that's what Paul's getting at, though. This is what it looks like to imitate Christ. And what we have to remember is Jesus Christ went to the cross. He had all the power of the world. Prove yourself. You've saved others. Now save yourself.
Hmm.
And it's human nature to say, absolutely. And Paul's like, no, Jesus didn't do it. And we're not going to do it either.
Yeah.
And we'll see that in 1 Peter.
We've already been told they need to have self-control, but in
Yeah.
verse 3 it says, in the ESV it says not a drunkard. I like the CSB, it says not an excessive drinker. The Baptists love this passage because this is one of the passages that will say teetotalers, we can't have alcohol at all, which
Yeah.
this contradicts Paul himself, because isn't it in First Timothy where
Yep.
he tells Timothy to drink alcohol for his stomach?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so
Exactly.
so this isn't like an absolute.
I think it's 2 Timothy, but
This is Second Timothy. Okay.
yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Drink a little
but,
wine
but
for your young stomach. Yeah.
yes. So this is something where this goes back to the self-control thing, and obviously that's going to be one of the vices of the first century is alcohol. You just don't have as many vice options available as we might today. Like they didn't have the video games as a vice option, but this is one of those things that could be a vice. So it's not be a drunkard. And then even along with that, like how often does violence come along with something like not being self-controlled or uh, not being, sober, but not violent, but gentle, not quarrelsome. In these things right here, it's amazing how with men especially, we oftentimes look at the virtue of a man who is quarrelsome in a leadership position. Because look at how much they stick to their conviction, and how I see this with male pastors all the time who are just being jerks. They're being quarrelsome, but it's
Mhm.
look at they're defending the Bible, and it's just what the Bible says. It's like, no, they're being quarrelsome. They're being inappropriate. They're not being
Yeah.
gentle.
Yeah.
When have we ever used the term a moral failing for a pastor who's not gentle? No, we say moral
Exactly. Yeah.
failing because it has to do
Yeah.
with sex or money. But no, there's plenty of pastors who are not gentle. They are quarrelsome, and it's like that's a moral failing, bro.
Yeah.
But this is one of those ones that we almost see those as virtues, which is funny because if a woman was quarrelsome, we would use the B word for her.
Oh,
Uh,
yeah.
but for a man, we almost elevate those things.
Yeah. Yeah. It's especially because we're prideful, right? We're
Mhm.
prideful, and it's a yeah. I don't think I need to even add anything to what you just said. You're right on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Say that again louder for the people in the back of the room who didn't hear.
Oh my gosh, did I actually just say that?
Well played. Hey,
It's a good thing I'm going to edit this.
oh, you're gonna edit that from now on? Okay.
Yeah.
Not a lover of money. We've talked about that a little bit earlier, but that's
Oh,
it's not money itself, it's just materialism, we could just say, right? Like the stuff.
well, this raises a serious issue, especially in the first
Okay.
century world, very much so. And I think we need to think about this in our own culture as well. And we discussed this a little bit when we did those episodes on poverty
Yeah.
earlier, and I think on our Thessalonian series. And that is, it's very likely the case that someone got wealth at the expense of somebody else.
Oh, okay.
That's the problem. All right. And then the problem also becomes, especially first century cultural context, when you gain money and wealth, you gain power with it. And now it's simply used to manipulate, and it's dangerous. It's extremely dangerous. It's extremely dangerous when the church becomes the power in the Roman world in the fourth and fifth centuries. You see what happens. We have 1,000 years of history of what
Mhm.
happens from it. It's extremely dangerous. I think that the megachurch scene is it's I think we're walking into
Yep.
danger there. So I don't think it's just materialism, because that was simply not an issue for Paul in Paul's
Mhm.
day. It's certainly relevant today, but I wouldn't start there. I would simply say, no, in Paul's day, they were worried about food. They were worried about eating tomorrow. So being a lover of money is just simply someone who gains excessively enough. It's at someone else's loss and someone else's expense. And I think that's the problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh The next section this becomes contentious as well. He must manage his own household
Yeah,
well with all
yeah.
dignity, keeping his children submissive. Um, First off, I've known many people who take this literally saying,
Mhm.
"Oh, if this someone cannot be a pastor unless they are married and have children because they can't demonstrate these things."
Yeah. Oh my
So
goodness. Yeah, that's right.
once
Yep.
again, this is situational. Paul's not laying out all the absolute requirements saying you have to be married with kids in order to be a pastor.
Yeah. And again, these are principles by which we judge and determine whether a person's qualified to either be in office or to remain in office.
Mm,
So you bring up a good point. The husband about one wife doesn't mean that they have to be married or that they have to be a male. Right. Manage his own household well. The idea of that is, first off, this is a cultural principle in the Roman world.
mhm,
In the Roman world, the patriot potestas, the authority of the father, he was the absolute authority. In fact, he had the right to go to a court and say, "I'll be the judge over my son
mhm,
because if my son or daughter, if they did something wrong, they've shamed the family, and me to maintain the honor of the family, I pronounce the justice on him."
mhm,
Because we would think, oh, if you're the father, you're going to let him off. No, you're going to, because that would bring even more shame. We all know he did this. And so what you're going to do is you're going to defend the family's honor by being the judge and condemning that son to say, see, we condemn that act. In the Roman world, the whole empire was considered to be a family, and the emperor was the head of the household. The local family was in the microcosm of the empire. So the father, first off, we'll get this in First Peter. The father was actually, or the husband, was responsible for the religion in the family. So when Christianity comes and says, "Hey, you women can make decisions for yourself," we're empowering women in a way that fundamentally undermine Rome and cause serious problems in the empire. And I think that's the context in First Peter chapter 3.
yeah,
Next thing then was the father also is to maintain that order within the family, discipline, etc. Because if so, that maintains the discipline in the larger scope of the empire. So Paul's just relaying a principle that totally makes sense. It's fine. It's great. Must manage his own family well. That doesn't mean that there aren't exceptions. You look at the Proverbs and it says, "Train your child in the way they should go, and when they're old, they will not depart from it."
that's
Oh,
wisdom.
so if my
Yeah,
child,
yeah,
became a drug addict, then I'm a bad parent. Like, no, these are general principles. The book of Proverbs are not absolute statements.
yeah,
You could be a great parent and your child falls into an issue or falls this way or has a feeling that doesn't necessarily come upon you. In the same way, then, that the idea is if a person does manage their family well, their household well, there's an indication, not proof, but an indication that they can manage the church well, because the church is this larger functioning family, especially in this Greco-Roman context. But it doesn't mean to exclude somebody just because a child is rebellious or this happened there, or they had a marriage failure before, especially before they were a Christian or whatever. I would even say after they were a Christian, but I understand the difficulty there. I
mhm,
think Paul's talking about what's their character like now. Here's how we can test. Now, if you have a priest or you have a person that goes into pastoral ministry and they're single, we can't use these two passages, husband about one wife, or two statements, husband about one wife, and manage their own household well. We can't use that to determine if they're qualified for being a pastor or not.
mhm.
That doesn't mean that they're excluded. It just means, well, we hope you can do really well in every other category, but we don't know here. Whereas someone that manages their household well, look, clearly there's an indication, not proof, that they can manage the church well. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely, and it's even somewhat of a parallel passage that I see with, uh, Ephesians 5 and 6. I mean, think
Yeah,
about it. Paul, when he was writing to the Ephesians, where's he writing to Timothy at? In
yeah,
Ephesus. They're gonna be dealing with the same issues in terms of household codes and whatnot, and so it's that's the expectation. So this isn't Paul reframing or, blowing up the system and trying to figure
right.
out what it looks like. It's also not appealing to the way it ought to be. It's saying, based on how the system works, this is the way it will look like. Now, a question though is, the he needs to manage his household well. His kids must be submissive. At what point does that change? So the pastor who's 50 years old and his kids are 25
Yeah,
and
exactly.
they're doing their own thing. Does that mean the the kid, the pastor is disqualified for ministry? What does this mean to be for a kid to be submissive?
I think the best way to answer that is to go back to what I just said, that in the Greco-Roman culture, The
Mhm.
father was the head of the household. If the kids are obedient and things are running well within the family, then there's an indication that that person can run the church well. Doesn't prove that they can, because they might still fail. They might not be a good leader within the larger context. You have children and a wife that's supposed to be submissive. Doesn't mean that all the congregants are going to be submissive, and you might not
Yeah.
be able to handle that kind of tension. But if that's not the case in the home, then there's an indication that they might not be able to handle that in the larger context of the church. So you have to evaluate, why is that home not going well? What's happening there? And if it has to be young children.
Mhm.
Paul clearly does not have the understanding of the Greco-Roman culture. Wouldn't discuss this in terms of, now you have your own family and the father or mother is still above you. No, you're not being judged by them. It's children at home is the idea. Can you manage your home well? And what that looked like it's relative. I don't
Mm.
think there's an absolute answer to that.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, verse 6 must not be a recent convert or may become puffed up with conceit and fall in the condemnation of the devil. Um, this is just, I mean, just wisdom right here. How often have we
Yeah.
seen, especially with a
Yeah.
celebrity or someone who has the profession of faith? And so,
Right.
even if it's not elevated into pastoral ministry in social media days, they're elevated into a place where people want this celebrity to now be their voice because they're in the right tribe. And then you find out, oh man, this guy like he formed theologically and he has all these weird
Exactly.
beliefs. And then or hey, he actually was just going through a crisis and he's jumped off the wagon and there's just so much there that says like, yeah, if you, of course you should never elevate a recent convert. But we're tempted to, especially when it's someone who's rich or powerful.
Exactly. Or gifted or charismatic or good looking,
Mhm.
all the problems that we have. Um,
Yes.
yeah,
The struggle is real, Rob.
yeah, ask us about it. We'll be happy to tell you, in
Enough
our
about me
humility.
though. What do you think about me?
Exactly, exactly. The problem becomes with a new convert. First off, they likely don't know the word well enough to be able to teach effectively. That's not an absolute. They might be a college professor somewhere on Bible,
Mhm.
but they also, we don't have the time to test the veracity of their faith, the veracity of their commitment, the truthfulness of their walk.
Mhm.
All the things here are a life that has been observed for some period of time. And if a person's become a follower of Jesus recently, we're expecting a transformation. Well, we've all seen it. We've all seen people that were baptized one day,
Mhm,
were
mhm.
wonderful, and then within 6 months, they're not going to church any longer. They're falling
Yeah.
away, back to whatever it might be. You need to give that person time for the sake of everybody. Remember this, by the way. Paul's going to get into, and I think we might have mentioned this before. Timothy, don't lay hands on someone too quickly. This is Second Timothy. And I think he's saying, because I made that mistake. I laid hands on someone too quickly, and I've seen them, and we see many people within Paul's ministry that even, Demas in Colossians sends his greetings, and yet Paul says in Second Timothy, Demas who love the present world, which
Mhm.
sounds exactly like First John. If anyone loves the world, the love of God's not in him, and has deserted us. So here's a man, Demas, who was ministering with Paul in Colossae, so that the Colossian church knew who he was, and he sends greetings. And it's likely the same person. Demas is not that popular of a name, whom Paul says he's deserted us and because he loved the present world. So there's always going to be mistakes. The idea of this list is to make sure that we make as few mistakes as possible. We don't entrust somebody that shouldn't be there for everyone's sake, that person as well as the congregation. But they're not absolute rules. And so the idea of, I think the new convert would be, there's just no way to know.
Mhm.
So yeah. Now, what's new mean? The idea of it being relative, by the way, what's new? How long have they have to be a convert? Well, long enough so they can be trained in the word, so they can be trained in the role, they can be trained in the understanding, and long enough that we can observe their life to make sure
Mm,
that they actually meet the basic requirements that are set forth here.
mm.
So,
That's good.
yeah,
Um,
thanks.
let's see, as we just to quickly just to finish this out, and I know we have some
Yeah,
final thoughts to talk about. Just to look at deacons real quick, in verses 8 through 13, we'll kind of
okay,
breeze through this. Um,
okay.
deacons likewise. So this is it's definitely like a new
Yeah,
section here, but he's wanting to connect it.
yeah,
Um, he doesn't give the exact same qualifications of for what's expected of them. Like
right.
they're not told to teach. They're actually like it's the ethics and the character that they still need to possess. Not be double tongued.
Yeah,
Not indulging in much wine. Not be greedy for money. For there, it's like, hey, what's the character of this person? Um, let them be
Yeah.
tested, and if they prove themselves blameless, let them serve as deacons. So what I'm seeing just up to until through verse 10, it's just,
Yeah.
do they have a character? And we're assuming that because it's a deacon, like you said, it's this idea of service. They're a table server. That's the job description. So we don't need to, yeah, they don't need to teach. They're not ruling. They're not overseeing. Their job is to be able to assist the pastor. Um, and we see this in Acts chapter 6, like what the deacons were doing.
Exactly. Right.
And so this is the thing. They're assisting that person who is in that position of, more authoritative leadership.
Yeah, and it begins with likewise, as the New American
Mhm.
Standard says. And the idea of likewise means in the same way. In other words,
Yeah.
I don't have to repeat the list because it basically is it's this, the same things apply to the deacon,
Uh-huh.
although we might conclude that, well, it doesn't say that they must be able to teach things like because they don't have
Yeah.
teaching roles.
Yeah.
But the idea of the ethics, the character, the conduct of a deacon must match up this as well. Thing to remember, and anyone who's in ministry, and being in ministry means you sing on stage. This is interesting, by the way, because should musicians on the stage be not new converts,
Oh gosh. Yep. Yep. This is a huge
right?
question. Yep.
And the reason why is because when you are on the public forum, you are representing the church.
Yep.
So when you go to the grocery store, when you go to the Little League game, when you go wherever you might go to your workplace, people recognize you. Hey, that person was on stage. Hey, that person was doing announcements. That person was doing the tithe.
Yep.
That person was preaching the sermon. That person was singing a song. And you have a responsibility to represent the church well. So I
Hmm.
think, yeah, even the person on stage in a modern context that's worshiping probably needs to have some criteria of in which they follow these qualifications, and therefore they need to be tested. And I
Yeah.
think that's kind of the idea. And I think, yeah,
And I
it's the
think,
same character.
and even to speak to that, because as a musician, I've served in many different kinds of churches. I've been hired on, like they don't even know me, but they need me, and I've been paid to go play at churches. I remember at a church in Oakland, or Piedmont, I
Yeah.
was serving at years ago, and me and another friend of mine were doing that. And in between services, like my buddy, who is not a Christian at all, like he's like,
Oh,
"Hey, I need to go. I'm going to go smoke some weed," and he had his joint. And they're paying him handsomely to go in and play music in this gig. Um,
right.
there's other times where I've been a part of a church though. That one was just I was just a hired gun, where the church was very outreach oriented, and, there was actually a lot of musicians at this church. It was fantastic. It
Okay.
was a very
Okay.
small church, and it actually got, birthed out of Young Life, and so there's very much an
Okay.
outreach part for it. For them, they used having
Yeah.
musicians play
Yeah.
as a way to get people to come to church who would never come to church. And even for me, there was a time in my life I stopped going to church. I started going to church again because I'm like,
Yeah.
"Dude, this guy who's a great musician wants me to play with him at his church, I'll totally go." And that was the way that brought me into the church after not
Yeah.
attending churches for, 3 or 4 years. Um, I was also at other churches where, no, you're not playing on the stage unless you're a church
Yeah.
member,
Yeah.
not even just a regular
Yeah.
attendee. Are you a member of the church? Because it's for what you said earlier, you're on the stage, you're representing the church, and people need to know that you need to be able to be accountable for your behavior if you're going to be sitting up there in a leadership type role. So I see the
Yeah.
spectrum. I think the thing is,
Yeah.
do we know why we are platforming people, or are we just doing it
Yeah.
without thinking about it?
That's a really good qualification that might I want to like maybe even backtrack a little bit what I said. If the church is known for that, for
Hmm.
bringing people, I know it's um I have no problem, and I think people come on journeys to Christ. We have this whole concept of they had this moment where they came to faith in Christ. I think there are some people that they don't know when that happened.
Yeah.
They came to faith in Christ over a course of time.
Yep.
And I have no problem saying, hey, let that person serve, let that person help, let that. And we did that at my church because that's their way of becoming involved. In other words, they join the community first before they join the faith. And I
Hmm.
think that's great that they can do such. And so if the church is saying, we're going to minister this way, we're going to bring
Yeah.
people in, that's awesome. I do have a problem, I think we discussed this offline, with the hired gun mentality,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
whole idea is, oh, we have to put an excellent thing on. It's like, this is who we are. This is our community. In our community, we have this person reading announcements and they might stutter, but you know what? They're involved and it's
Yes.
great for them. It's so good for their self-esteem, their self-confidence. What we did at my church was we always had a youth involved in every service.
That's
So
good.
not only were they attending, they were involved. Now this is my church. I get to participate. They would read the scriptures. Once a month, they would do the announcements. We'd have youth involved in the singing and the worship. We had a really immature pastor doing the preaching, but that's not what I mean.
Uh-huh.
But let them be involved. And so I think if you're doing that, yeah, that youth is not expected to be perfect character, hasn't met the requirements for being a pastor. So if the church is doing that, I think that's great. And if you're bringing in people, let them serve or whatever, that's great. So,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Finally, with deacons, verse 11 does have that women passage, which
yeah.
we talked about a little bit earlier. The reason why I would assert that this is speaking about female deacons and not the wives of deacons. Remember, the ESV says
Mhm.
their wives,
Right, right,
and this is in the context of deacons. And other translations say the women. Um,
right.
Obviously, we would say in the hierarchy of things, the office of elder is there's more writing on it. It's a more superior office, if you want to say. I hate using that
Well,
language, but
prominent, yeah, and
prominent,
yeah,
whatever you want to.
public,
Yeah.
yeah,
And look at the qualifications for an elder. It seems like it's more for an elder than it would be for a deacon. If the elder is the pastor of the church and this sort of thing, why is there no provision for the wife of the elder? But he's
right,
gonna put in a
yeah,
provision for the wife of a deacon when they're just
right,
serving, and it's like, no, this is probably talking about female deacons,
yeah.
let alone the fact let's look outside of these letters. Phoebe is
Phoebe,
identified
Romans
as a
16,
deacon.
verse 1,
Yeah,
yeah.
we have other deacons, so it's like, oh, no, it's contextually, Paul's probably talking about female deacons here.
Yeah. Yeah, and it makes you wonder, going back to the question you asked earlier, like, why are women not addressed in terms of being
Yeah.
elders or pastors? Maybe there were no women at this point in time that were serving in that role. Doesn't
Mm,
mean that they can't serve in that role. Whereas I think you clearly are having women like Phoebe in Romans 16, verse
yeah.
1, who are already serving in that role. That's why they're addressed there. Maybe that's why women are omitted earlier. So, yeah, absolutely. One thing we didn't mention, I know we got to finish up here,
Yeah, yeah.
is pay
Mm,
and finances when it comes to pastors. You talked about you can't be a lover of money.
mhm.
One of the things that I think churches can go wrong on both directions. I think they can underpay their pastors, which they often do. That's just simply the way it is because the church doesn't have enough money. Okay, the church now needs to give that pastor the freedom to get extra money somewhere else. If you can't pay them a full salary, then you're not going to require 40 hours a week from them.
Mhm.
We have to figure out some ways that the congregation is going to have to divvy up time to help with other duties within the church. But if we underpay pastors, you can get resentment from the wife, from the
Mhm.
family, from the kids. We don't get to go on vacations. We don't get to go do
Yeah.
this. We don't get to have that. Everybody else, and even from the pastor himself, I'm overworked. I work 50 hours a week. A lot of churches, by the way, 50 hours a week. We discussed this.
Required.
It's kind of the normal, what's
Mhm.
expected. But people might not realize that we're
It
expected
was
to
in
work
my
50
job
hour weeks.
description.
It was
It
in my
wasn't
job
like
description as
yeah,
well.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah, at several places, and we're expected to have 50-hour weeks. Or 50 hours was like easy for us to accomplish in most cases
Yeah.
as well. But
You
the
knocked that
reality of
out by
that means
Tuesday.
that how do I attend my kids' sporting events? How do I attend my kids' attend this or attend that? So I think we have to be careful with that, especially when there's a lack of income that comes along with it. We need to give them a fair wage so they can do their job well. But at the same time, there's also a problem of paying a pastor too much because
Mm.
some people are not qualified to have any
Mhm.
other job. Their
Mhm.
training has always been in ministry. They grew up in the church. They're really gifted in the church. Da, da, da. And then they get this nice salary,
Yeah.
$110,000, which is actually it's not astronomical, but it's also not uncommon for some churches to be paying pastors that much money, $125,000. And guess what? They can't make that money in any other job.
Mhm.
And so now the response, the desire to not be honest right now because I'm going to lose my job. Yeah, I can't afford to
Mhm.
lose my job. Therefore, I'm going to hold on to it. I had a moral failing. I had an ethical issue over here. I treated somebody poorly over there. Whatever it might be. And they don't come forward because they get paid so much money. They can't find that job anywhere else that makes the same amount of money. I think that's
Yep.
an issue too. So,
Yep. Yep.
um, and
When you
then
become a
one other quick,
professional pastor, what else are you gonna do?
yeah, exactly, yeah. One other quick thought, and that's this: we have a lot of people that are in pastoral ministry that are not trained and not equipped. They don't know the word
Mm.
well, and one of the reasons why they aren't trained is because they don't have the time for seminary. My response to that is change their job description so that part of what they do is attend seminary or
Mhm.
graduate school. And B, they don't have the money, it's too expensive. And change the salary so that you're additionally giving them whatever they need to cover tuition. because that means we value you. We care about you as an individual. We're not just using you for your work and service here. We're investing in you so that you have this training. And we care about the church because as a trained leader, you're going to be more effective in your ministry. And these young men and women that go to seminary, they come out. Sometimes it takes them 8 years to get through seminary, working 2 jobs. They can't do it. And then they come out with massive debt, and then we pay
Yep.
them $55,000 a year, $60,000 a year,
Yeah.
which is not enough money just to pay their debt, let alone live in most parts of the country.
Yeah.
So, folks, we need to give a fund within the local church that says this money goes for pastoral training and pastoral education for young pastors that want to be in leadership, so that they can afford to. We'll bring them on the church, we'll give them the experience, and we're going to take part of their job description and make sure that they go to seminary, and we're going to pay for that.
Yeah.
Wow, that is investing in people and loving people.
Now, with this, and I'm a fan of seminary. I think it's important. I think ongoing training is good.
Yeah.
Many denominations demand a seminary degree, a minimum of like an MDiv. Um,
Yeah.
is that an expectation that should be like a baseline, like has to have it? Because part of me says they need to have the knowledge base, but then I don't know if this is an outlier, but I look at our friend Dave Shields, who we had on, I think back in the
Yeah.
Act series. He doesn't have a seminary degree. He doesn't even have a
Right.
college degree. I don't think he finished. And he's one of the finest examples of a pastor I've ever seen in my life.
Absolutely, he's one of the best pastors I've ever met.
Yeah.
Um, Absolutely, but he's also studied and knows the word. So there's two caveats to
Uh-huh.
this. One is, it, you see pastors. I'm going to go a second way before I answer your question or your comment. You see pastors getting up in a pulpit, and when you get up in a pulpit, authority, power, it all comes. What you say from that pulpit is assumed to be the truth by
Yes.
so many people,
You're speaking for
and
God.
it's so we got to be so careful. Test everything, hold fast to
Mhm.
that which is good. But I'm telling you right now that if you open up, I bet you, Vinny, right now, if we open up a passage in Amos, we were discussing before, in the book of Amos, or Hesitations.
Yeah.
Not actually a biblical book. I
Wah,
got you.
wah,
No,
wah, wah.
um, I bet you we would have trouble going, well, this is what's actually going on in the text,
Yeah.
because it's not our area of expertise. We're not, and we, and yet some pastor without a formal training gets up and preaches on Ezekiel. Like, oh, we have to train and equip these leaders. That
Mhm.
doesn't mean that they have to have the formal education. They might have the informal education. But I would also say, hey, let's get someone like that, Dave, if he needs to or wants to, whatever education he needs or he wants. I'm not sure why he does or does not have
Yeah.
that education. Um, I forgot your question. What else I was going to say in terms
Which
of,
is
but I
what
think, yeah.
is someone like a Dave
Oh, okay.
an
Yeah.
outlier, or
Yes.
what should we expect of that?
Okay. A lot of there's two parts of this. Denominations typically say you must have a formal training, a formal education. I know
Mhm.
the denomination I'm ordained in, the whole process that, like, we're trying to reevaluate that so that we can make it easier, because it's too costly and too time consuming for people to go through this. They're going to be
Yeah.
35 years old before they finish with a lot of debt. So they're trying to change the requirements. Kudos, excellent. When we were running the seminary in Northern California that I was trying to start up, we were trying to evaluate that as well. How can we skinny the curriculum as much as we can, making it so that you can finish it in 2 or 3 years or 4 years at the most, and not accumulate too much debt, and yet also not take away things that you actually need in formal training. You're not going to get all the training that you need. Some of it's just going to happen on the job.
Mhm.
The other problem becomes, though, and I think that's a valid question. I think it's an important question. So I think the answer would be no, they don't absolutely have to have that formal training, but I would recommend it at all times, at all possible.
Yeah.
There's also, however, a big movement, massive churches around the United States. They don't want that training. I
Mhm.
was actually looked down upon because I had a PhD,
Mm.
because, oh, you're too much of the academy and not of
Yeah.
the church. Like, no, these are one thing, people. The church and the academy are to be one. But there are so many churches where the pastor, they're just talented. But folks, being talented, and your primary responsibility, Second Timothy, it says, to study and show yourself approved, a workman who handles the word of God accurately and does not need to be ashamed. That's my paraphrase.
Yeah.
The responsibility of the pastor of the church is to proclaim the word, preach the word, 2 Timothy 4, in all seasons, be ready in season and out of season. If they don't have the training and equipping, how do they do that? One other thing that is this. I don't know how many more one other things this
Yeah,
makes
yeah,
on the
we're
list.
getting long now.
All right. Pastors don't get training in a lot of business things. We don't get training on how to hire people and fire people. We don't get training in HR issues, but they happen within a church. What we need is people to come alongside us, like Bill Douglas, for example, as you know, who's on our board, and did it at my church. Here's a person, and Martin Lonzo, phenomenal leaders, administrators. I mean, I've never met a person with a gift of administration as high or as great as Martin Lonzo at my church. We need those people to come in and help us administrate, help us lead, help us do HR, help us to do hiring and firing, help us to do contract negotiations, because we're going to build a new, we're going to get the parking lot paved or the roof done or an air conditioning service. These guys have experience in doing all those things, whether it's hiring somebody within the congregation or hiring somebody else, as well as negotiating a wall with our next door neighbor who's complaining on the property. Let them come alongside, and those of you who have those gifts, use those gifts, because the church needs them.
That's good. That's good.
We've solved it all now. I think
we did all of 1 Timothy 3. Look at that. We're awesome.
Your church is not perfect by the time you're done with this series of podcasts. That's on you. We've done our job. I
agree. Well, everyone, this went a little long today. Hopefully this helps you out, though, not only for you and how you view your church, but like I said, most of the ethical things, especially that we've gone through, these are just things that are kind of Christian attributes anyway. Not to be lovers of money, not to be drunkards, not to be slanderers. Like this is just a Christian virtue that we should live in. So they are very relevant to you, even if you don't aspire to the office of overseer. And so we definitely.
But they're also not absolute standards by which we judge and condemn everybody else within the church.
Very true.
Right? Let's have grace.
Yeah. Very good. Hey, if you like it, subscribe. If you're listening to this on the audio, jump over to YouTube and subscribe. Help us out there. Leave a review either in the audio portion or in the YouTube. And if you are watching on YouTube, what does the elder process, the pastoral process in your church look like? I'm curious if you know how that process goes. Do they look into these things, or how do they go about bringing new folks in? We'd love to see that and interact with it. But until then, we will see you guys next week. Bye.
Thanks for joining us today. If you dug it, please subscribe and share it with others. Check us out at Determinetruth.com to see more of what we do, and maybe even consider supporting us. See you next time.
Faith is an ocean you can walk on.